Hi, my name is Austin Kowitz. I'm a student at Louisiana Culinary Institute, and today I'm going to be showing you a healthy recipe for a stuffed pork loin roast. We're going to start out with some dried apricots. We have some fresh sage leaves. If you don't have fresh sage, you can substitute that with 1 teaspoon of dried sage. We also have some dried tart cherries, some crushed walnuts, and then some salt and pepper for taste. First thing we're going to do is we're going to give a rough chop to these dried apricots. Now, the important thing to remember is to keep your fingers out of the way. You want to make somewhat of a claw with your hand, leave your fingers out from under the blade. When you're chopping these, you're going to want to chop them to about the size of a dime, preferably smaller if you can, but once you get it to the size of a dime, you should be fine. So it looks like what we have here is good. I'm going to go ahead and set these in our mixing bowl. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to the fresh sage. With the sage, the leaves, they seem like they're going to be somewhat hard to chop. Just make a pile of them the same way you cut the apricots, watching your fingers. Just go ahead and put a rough chop on them, about the same size. You don't want to cut them too small. All right, starting to look good. And as you're cutting them, you'll notice the smell of the sage is going to start coming out, and that's what you want to be able to smell, is it the plant releasing the oils, and it's really going to give a good aroma once we stuff it in the pork loin and get it cooking. Looks like we're about done with that. Now, the walnuts came crushed, so I don't need to worry about those. I'm going to place those inside of the mixing bowl. I'll be adding the crushed walnuts now, and then you can give a small chop if you'd like to. It depends on the consistency you're looking for these dried cherries. I'm going to go ahead and cut them all about in half, but you don't need to. If it just depends on your preference. All right, it looks like I'm getting the consistency I'd like, so I'm going to go ahead and place those in the bowl. Now all you're going to do once you get it in the bowl is you just want to give it a nice toss. If you're not comfortable tossing it, mixing it around, you can go ahead and you can get yourself a spoon. You can get a fork, something just to mix it around. We're just going to toss them, and then we're going to set it off to the side. The recipe calls for 4 pounds, so we're going to go ahead and get this out. You want to remember that you're working with raw meat, so before you go and touch anything else, make sure you wash your hands. It's okay to touch your equipment that you're using, but other than that, you want to wash your hands before moving on. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make, using just the tip of the knife, I'm going to make a small incision, and kind of like you flip through a notebook or flip through a magazine, you just kind of pull the meat back as you cut. And it'll be easier if you do it with the fat side down, because when you roll it later on, you're going to want the fat at the top. So place it fat side down and then begin to cut, and we're just going to do a nice little roll. If you're uncomfortable rolling the pork loin, you can start from one side and make a nice even cut down to the other side and butterfly the pork loin. What I'm doing now is making small cuts, and every time I make a cut, a new seam appears, and I'm just going to be rolling that with my thumb. And you want to be gentle. You don't want to rip the meat and have a hole on one side, because as you go to stuff it, your stuffing will fall out. If you're able to do the roll method, it also makes it much easier to flatten the meat out to give it more of a consistent cook. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to flatten the meat out to give it a nice consistent cooking surface. All right, we've got a nice flat, even surface all the way around. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take half the salt the recipe calls for, and we're just going to sprinkle that generously and spread it out. And then we're going to take our black pepper, and you're going to do the same thing. Half the black pepper and place it on. Now, after adding the black pepper, you're going to add your mix that you made earlier. Just place it on in a nice even layer. When stuffing something, you want to avoid, if you can, placing it on the edges so that it doesn't fall out and you lose all that good filling. Next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take the thin side and you're going to want to roll it. And once you get it rolled, you're going to place that rolled side on the bottom of your cutting board. Now, to prevent your stuffing from falling out as you're roasting it and as you're moving it around, we're going to use butcher's twine, and we're going to truss. So basically we're just going to tie it up, keep everything in. If you start by making a small loop around one side, just how you would tie your shoes, one loop, do it again, make it nice and snug, and then you can go ahead and tie it off. You want to give yourself some excess so when you get to the end, you can tie the remaining twine together. Next, we're going to be trussing. Trussing is a way of keeping everything together and also making a compact surface so you have a nice roasting area. What you're going to want to do is you're going to take the rope, you're going to cross it over your wrist, around your thumb, and then kind of give your thumbs up and then tilt it down. And just like you would floss your teeth, you're going to take this, you're going to get it underneath the loin, pull it to the bottom, and then you should have what looks like a rib cage with a spine going down the middle. You're going to do that every few inches down to the end. I'm going over my wrist, around my thumb into my palm, facing my palm down, and then making that dental floss motion all the way down. And you just want to go a few inches away from where you put your other one. Basically, you're going for the look of a rib cage. We're going to do that a few more times until we get to the end. Once you reach the end, you're going to want to flip your pork over. And now what you'll see is you have the same rib cage as the other side, but you have no spine. So you're just going to take the rope around the end, and every so often you're just going to loop it through one side so you can go over here and then back under. And you're just going to do that all the way down until you reach the excess string that we had in the beginning. And once again, the reason we're doing this is to keep everything compact and have a nice roasting surface and an even cooking area. You don't want to have one side completely cooked and the other side undercooked, because then you'll have to keep it in the oven a little longer, and that nice side that was cooked well is going to be overcooked, and it's not going to be appealing. Now that we've got to the end, we're going to flip it back over. We're going to pull it over the end of the meat, and we're going to take that excess that we had at the beginning, and we're just going to make a nice little knot, just like if you were tying your shoes. Now it's ready for the oven. Now that the pork loin is completely trussed, we had our oven preheated at 375 degrees. We're going to go ahead and place it on a baking sheet with parchment paper. We're using parchment paper to prevent anything from sticking, because as this cooks, it's going to let off juices, and we don't want it to burn to the bottom of the pan and ruin our pork loin. Before we place this in the oven, since we have been working with raw meat, we want to go ahead and wash our hands. Now that I've washed my hands, I'm going to place the pork loin in the oven. The oven's set to 375 degrees. We're going to want to keep this in there for 40 to 45 minutes, or until the pork reaches an internal temperature of 145 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer, you're going to want to go by the time. It's been approximately 45 minutes, so I'm going to take my meat thermometer and check the internal temperature of the pork, see if it's reached 145 degrees yet. You're going to want to take your thermometer and stick it in the thickest part of the pork loin that you can. When taking it out, you're going to want to use an oven mitt, or if you have a towel, because it has been sitting at 375 degrees for 45 minutes. We've reached our ideal internal temperature, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to set it on my cutting board, and we're going to go ahead and cut into it. The pork loin's been sitting for 10 minutes. You want to let meat rest after you cook it to allow the juices to reabsorb. You're just going to take your knife and you're going to cut off the twine that you put on earlier to help hold everything together. Don't forget, you did put some on the bottom as well. You don't want to cut this and serve twine. Now that all the twine is removed, we can go ahead and cut into the pork. The thickness you cut your portions to should depend on the amount of guests you're serving. We're going to go ahead and make about 1/2 inch cuts. And then go ahead and take a look. Everything looks cooked all the way through. Our filling held up. If you don't have a meat thermometer, you can check as you're cutting to see if it's cooked all the way through. And as we can see here, we have the same color consistency all the way through the meat, and the filling stayed in from the trussing. Now that we've got the pork loin sliced up, we're ready to go ahead and plate. And put the remaining piece of the loin here, and then take our small cuts and place them on the plate. I'm Austin Kowitz, and here's our stuffed pork loin roast. For this and other healthy recipes, visit rapidsfoundation.org.